Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and I appreciate the opportunity to address your conference. I apologize I can't be with you in person. Unfortunately, I'm out of town, but the thought occurred to us as we were talking with Laura is that perhaps I could use a newly installed electric capture technology here at our Economic Workforce Development Center to basically capture my presentation so that I can still provide it. So that's the technology we're using today. I'm hoping it'll work well for you, and hoping in the future that I can be with you in person. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Just a little bit on middle skill. For those of you that are not familiar with the term, it actually is those positions that we don't require a four-year degree, but do require some form of post-secondary education. So we're really talking about some post-secondary certificates on up to the associate's degree. And it's a pretty big size of the national economy as well as New York State. Just to share some data here on the slide with you, this is actually based on a report that was done a couple of years back by Skills to Compete that shows in New York State approximately 46% of the jobs are middle skill. And if you look at that for the Finger Lakes region, based upon a survey we did, some of the data, this comes from the survey report we did in September, you'll see that in Rochester it's a little different. About 37% of the jobs we find are actually in the middle skill area. As far as just some basic statistics to kind of orient you to this, 46% of the workforce, as we said, we saw that slide. But when you look at job replacement in terms of the openings that are occurring in the workforce, projected through 2018, the majority of them actually from New York State, that is, are in middle skill areas, about 39%. And some data that we did recently with the Regional Economic Development Council and trying to understand through 2018 where the jobs are in terms of growth around middle skill. We find there's about 6,800 positions that would be openings, I should say, that would be opening in the middle skill categories. So what are middle skills jobs we're talking about? We're talking about a really broad-based sector of the occupations that exist in our industries, and as you can see from the slide, we're everything from first responders, like fire, medical, paramedic, things like that, on into a lot of technologies. If you notice on the slide itself, you see a lot of technologist as the last word. I see a lot of this in healthcare and more emerging all the time. Obviously, IT, which I'm interested in today. But then you have things like automotive programs at the college where you have a lot more of electronics and a lot more of information technology that's going into being a technician in those fields. If we look at specific emerging technical careers that we're focused on at the college and tracking and looking at, in some cases adding positions to, you'll see that IT is, of course, like many of the educational institutions in the area and across the country, IT is a big piece of that. So we have recently cybersecurity. We actually have a Homeland Security Management Institute that's partnered with our cybersecurity area in order to look at how that spills over into managing the security of government agencies and also corporations. Cloud computing, obviously, a big piece of how we get our applications these days. Mobile computing and app development is a big piece of it. And then we also have things as interesting as like drone technology, which for those of you that have gotten into some of the small unmanned aerial vehicles, SUAV as they're referred to, heavily built on cellular technology, using cell phones to control the gimbals and the flight and such. So that kind of converges a lot of different areas that have traditionally been separate in IT into one space. You have, of course, HVAC. In our HVAC programs, we have a lot more and more building control systems. We actually have a building control lab by Siemens in our Applied Technology Center, and that very much is about controlling systems over the network. And of course, we have security issues with that as well, as more and more with cyber terrorism look to enter into building spaces and cause damage by having systems not work properly. And then also, obviously, agriculture, food processing, and last but not least is a whole array of health information technologies. So we know that these areas are strong. We're adding programs, as any of the schools are. You look at CompTIA, the Computer Training Industry Association, really had an interesting figure, 450,000, they estimate IT jobs go in the field. And it's interesting as we look at statements like that, it's a national figure, obviously. Manufacturing Institute, about 2 years ago, released a figure similar to that. They found that about 600,000 positions they felt went on the field, largely middle skill oriented, skill production positions, machinists, things like that. It's about they estimate about 5% of the workforce. So we see statements like this, and a lot of the work that we've been trying to do is to understand what that actually means for Rochester, because you can see it at the national level, but it's not as helpful unless you start understanding how the different clusters of occupations that are supporting various industry sectors, how does that look like within our region, and what does it mean most importantly for us in our work, for a two-year school in terms of where we should be investing dollars, whether in short cycle training for encounter workers, whether it's more robust associated applied science degree pathways. So with that, a lot of the work that we've done, and I really understand Ken Garber's here today. He's been a big partner with CGR and also RBJ. We've been releasing about every 6 months. We just started doing these regional surveys, and we were getting more traction with those. The most recent one that we've done actually captured a little more IT than we have in the past. The goal long term is to have these more and more respondents, more and more participants, so that we get a better and better representation of the cross-section of the economy, so that our information is more accurate and a better approximation of what's actually occurring in terms of skill gaps. If you look at just in terms of middle schools overall, we found in our September report that about 61% of the persistently unfilled positions that were reported through the survey, which was about 23,000, is what we estimated, were in fact middle skill. So that translates to about 14,000 positions of the 23 middle skill. And what we find here, and for us again, for many of you that are in the room that work in healthcare, this is probably not a surprise, but for those of us that are still trying to understand this from a gap perspective, you see that in addition to what you would expect, the classic support roles in middle skill oriented healthcare, which would be home healthcare aides and of course nursing, which is probably one of the largest middle skill positions to recognize. But you also have IT technician, you have computer programmer, statistician. In the upper categories, you're seeing IT related positions. Some of the positions that we're looking at offering more and more within the revisions to our curriculum and manufacturing do include IT in some way. So those are something that we see quite a bit of. As we go kind of further into this, what I'd like to do is switch gears. So that gives you some context, I guess, of the kind of work that we're doing. We haven't yet directly focused on IT. We're actually going to be doing that, ironically, in fall. So we do, as I mentioned, these surveys, regional surveys, once every 6 months. So we're due to do one again in fall with our partners, CGR and RBJ. What we're going to intend to do is to actually focus that more broadly on services and kind of extend the methodology that we used in the past with healthcare. So what we'll end up having is really one survey that people come into, and then we'll have sub-surveys, depending on once they identify early on in the process what industry they're from, and they'll get a specialized question set that's made ideal to what their environment is to make most relevant, so we get the best information. And IT will certainly be a piece of that. So that should give us a lot more granular information around both high skill, middle skill needs, perhaps some low skill needs within the information technology occupations that we're ready to support. And so what we kind of come up with here is about 6 key areas. These are not all inclusive, but they do represent some pretty large areas, I think you would agree, of where core positions would be within the information technology needs across industries in the Rochester region. And so what we've essentially done with each of those through a mapping process, as I mentioned, is basically map out to each of the SOCs, or that's the code that each occupation is given by the government, kind of walk through and associate that and map it. So this is basically a mapping for computer information systems. You can see there, essentially, these are the areas that either at the middle skill level or with some additional training at the high skill level, so it brings bachelor's level. These are the kind of positions that we believe, or actually we know from the research we've done, that relate to the jobs, and then there's the wage curve there, it's the 10, 50, to 90 percentile. And then the demand. So the demand data that we get is actually from a tool that aggregates a variety of 90 sources of like market data, a lot of it different data sets that come from different government agencies, and it's basically focused on the 9 county region, so it's local. And then what we do is we're taking the IPEDS completion data, so I should probably mention that as part of this analysis, what we're doing is basically trying to measure labor supply and labor demand, with labor supply being what the graduates within the core schools that focus on this at the 2-year level, what are they completing per year, and against comparing that against an approximation through this method of what the need is in terms of annual openings, and then actually looking for where there's gaps in order to let us see, can we document in some way that there are truly gaps in the workforce, and it's not just an anecdotal thing that we hear from various organizations, but we don't know how large it is. That's really the purpose of this. And so what we've done then is working is to create a dashboard. And this is actually a dashboard template that we were experimenting with. We've been using it for tooling machines, so manufacturing areas specifically to actually show where there might be gaps. In this case, this is again for computer information systems, so taking that demand data we just saw for those mappings we then end up seeing, and on the left there at the bottom, you'll see what the iPads are getting for schools that are outputting students for these careers, that are taking Title IV money from the government. That's all tracked. That's what the regional output is at the 2-year level. And as you can see, we also have 4-year schools like RIT because they also do that at the 2-year level. So 134 is our estimate from the iPads data. When we compare that to the estimated annual openings from our big data systems, you end up with a slight gap there, in this case 30. So it gives you a sense that that's one area that you might see through this method that there could be gaps. The columns on the right, those are for, as we look at gaps, one of the programs that we want to do through the workforce work group for the Finger Lakes Regional Economic Development Council, which is one of the reasons why we're doing this, is to then have what's the community response. Does it make sense for us then to increase the completions in specific programs in specific schools in order to try to eat away at that gap? And so that's what the columns to the right represent, which we're not really using today. When you look at other things that we've done, we've also been looking at real-time labor market data. So there's some really neat web scraping technologies that have emerged in the last couple of years that allow us to fine-tune down to a metropolitan statistical area, which in this case would be like the Rochester MSA. And what we can actually do is focus in on looking at all the job postings. In this case, these examples came from a 3-year span for those occupations that we showed you in that previous slide. When we look back here, we've taken those occupations and those basic titles that are associated with those, and for the metropolitan statistical area of Rochester, the Nine-County region, basically, what we've done is then done a search and we're looking at what are for the jobs that have been posted that map to those occupations. What are the most common clusters of skills that we see? And so what this tool does is bucket those into things like common skills, hard skills, which is in this case is the IT areas, customer service, things like that. And so this just shows you of the total postings how that ranks. It's pretty interesting. What we use this for is we're using it to actually show us what types of learning how aligned our learning outcomes in our curricula are to what businesses are actually asking for in job postings. And with this data, you have to be careful with it. These are not, you notice it says job postings at the top. It does not say job openings, because what we find is from the research that's been happening in the literature around this technology and how it should be used in workforce, we actually find that, in fact, the posting does not necessarily mean that there's a job creation behind it. In some cases, particularly in IT, actually, where you have a really wide use of job postings, you have a lot of things like bench building that are going on, and so in some cases you might have 10 to 15 or more postings where actually for only one job in the back that actually will occur. So you don't really want to use it as an indicator directly for what's going to occur. What you do want to use it for probably is more of a leading indicator for where businesses are looking to hire. And if they're looking to hire either now or in the near future, what are the specifications of the labor that they want to hire for? And that's kind of how we use it. So hopefully this could be useful to folks in the future. What we also then track then is the top skills. So for that same thing, we look at clustering. If you break the clusters out and just look at a rank order of skills, you're seeing here for computer information systems, this is what we see through that particular technology. What we're going to be doing, and something hopefully we can share more of this information with you, we were wrapping a lot of this to kind of share with you some of the templates that we're following. We're doing this for about 25 occupational clusters across 5 industry sectors. It's going to be healthcare, skilled trades, advanced manufacturing, hospitality, tourism, and information and computer technologies. And the goal is to take all this data, there's a lot more than what I've showed you, and basically put them into an interactive book. And that's actually what's here. This, what I'm showing you right now is basically the cover for a prototype of this book. But we'll be hopefully releasing that in late July. And we'll probably have everything mapped except for healthcare. We'll have a little bit of healthcare, but not as much as we intend to have in version 2 of it. And our goal with this is to be able to share this information with providers across the region so that they have a more access to some of this information and be very well documented. The assumptions that we're using to do this are laid out so that folks will know kind of, potentially, hopefully, how to use this data and making a more informed decisions across the community as it relates to investments in workforce. So that's just kind of in a nutshell. I think at this point, I'm going to wrap up my comments. I really appreciate your time, and hopefully in the future we can be with you in person and share with you some of our additional information. Appreciate it, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the session.